I'm First Alert Meteorologist Ashton Altieri. This week I'm at Operation Sierra Storm here in beautiful South Lake Tahoe, California. I am just outside the Tahoe Blue Event Center here in South Lake, where this week, again, it's Operation Sierra Storm. It's meteorologists from around the country that are gathered here to talk all things weather, all things climate, and with everything that's happening in Southern California right now, in LA with the wildfires, we're talking about disasters and disaster recovery. So it's quite timely that we've got Craig Fugate here with us, former FEMA administrator during the Obama years, right?
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk to us. A lot of people seem to have a misconception about what FEMA is and what FEMA does. Its original mission really wasn't even necessarily disaster response the way it's thought of today. Tell me a little bit about that misconception.
Well, I think when people think of FEMA, it's almost become a verb to describe responding to disasters. But the model that we use here in the U.S. is response to disasters is actually managed by local governments in the state. The governor is really the person that's in charge of disasters. And only when a disaster, like the fires in California, have exceeded that capability, either financially or resource, then the President of the United States can grant a disaster declaration at the request of the President or the request of the governor. And that then authorizes FEMA to support. And what FEMA does is really work with the governor's team on resources they need and coordinate on behalf of the president all the federal resources that the state may need. So right now in the California wildfires, one of those resources the state has asked for is the Army Corps of Engineers to help manage the debris removal operations in the areas that have been burned out.
Right. It's not the rebuilding necessarily.
It's not the rebuilding. And again, it depends on what those needs are. But when you get to rebuilding, that's not what really FEMA does. FEMA's like the initial response, and other federal agencies may be required where we don't have insurance and we need to look at rebuilding houses.
You mentioned insurance. Let's talk about the LA wildfires. We know that the process there for rebuilding is going to be a long one. Just like in Colorado, we've gone through this a number of times. The Marshall Fire destroyed about 1,000 homes and structures a few years ago near Boulder. It's a long process. We know that the insurance markets, as we've known them for a while, are breaking down, and more homes are becoming uninsurable, especially for wildfires, for flood threats, the type of disasters we often deal with in Colorado. So what do we do when things are just becoming increasingly uninsurable?
Well, that's a question that's a huge issue for the entire country. And it's one that in Washington they're going to have to look at as the president's directed a review of FEMA is, are we able to keep up with this growing uninsured loss that we're seeing from all these disasters as insurance is no longer working for certain threats. Wildfires, one of the more recent events that have become uninsurable. And the key thing that we're finding is without insurance, all of our programs were based upon insurance as the primary way that people would have money to rebuild. And with that gone, the federal programs weren't designed to fill that gap yet.
Yeah, so it's definitely a problem we're going to be dealing with across the country because we know we're going to have more disasters instead of fewer disasters. It must be dealt with.
Well, again, we're going to have to figure this out as a nation as we are seeing more and more risks that aren't insurable. How do we rebuild? And how do we make sure that we are preserving and making sure we have enough workforce housing? I think the term affordable housing doesn't really address the concerns that we have. So many places, the affordable housing that people who work and provide the goods and services, provide the protection, the firefighters, police officers, are getting priced out of their communities after these disasters.
So it's all about building for future risk. I know you've talked about that, and certainly that's something that's going to have to be important in Southern California as well as in Colorado for our next disaster, whether it's a wildfire, a flood, or something else. Craig, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And that's it for now here on CBS News Colorado. Covering Colorado First, I'm meteorologist Ashton Altieri.